Hello, thanks for joining our session today. Today we're going to talk about NSXT Federation with VCF on VxRail. My name is Philip Armstrong and I'm an engineering technologist with Dell Technologies focused on VxRail and VCF.
Hi, I'm Corey Fair. I'm also an engineering technologist with Dell Technologies focused on VCF on VxRail.
Thanks, Corey. As we get started today, this is a topic that was introduced in VMware Cloud Foundation 4.2, and it really opens up our VCF on VxRail customers to some additional use cases they didn't have previously. The first is operational simplicity. When you think about customers that are automating the deployment of the software-defined data center in multiple locations, multiple regions, the ability to provide them a single pane of glass to manage all of their network constructs across the NSXT environment is critical. And NSXT Federation allows us to do that. It also gives us the ability to create a common policy configuration. From a single management point, we can create security policies and push them to the local managers of multiple sites, multiple deployments of NSX. It also gives us a feature that many customers have been looking to deploy in global networking, right? This allows us to stretch our NSX network across multiple sites. It enables us workload mobility, also gives us the ability to do disaster recovery. Maybe we need to fail over to a region, a different region in a disaster. All of this is enabled by the NSXT Federation. So let's talk a little bit about what that is, right? Here on the screen, what you see is we've used SDDC Manager and VxRail Manager to automate the deployment of workload domains at multiple locations. You can see on the screen we have 3 different locations. All of those from an NSX standpoint are managed through separate UI, separate places. So if we want to go create segments, we want to go create firewall rules, we're going to log into each individual NSX manager. Introduce the global manager, and the global manager, we deploy a primary cluster in region A for high availability. And this primary cluster enables us to onboard the local managers in each location. So once we do that, each one of those is a local manager. And now from a single pane of glass, we can log into the global manager and manage all of our sites. We also deploy a global manager standby cluster in region B. And this is for high availability in the case of a disaster recovery. All of our configuration data is propagated over to our standby cluster so that we can fail over and continue having a single pane of glass to manage all of our NSX environments. This enables us as administrators to leverage the UI or the API to make global configurations by logging into the global manager. Maybe you want to create firewall rules or segments or gateways across one or multiple sites. You do all this through the global manager. And part of that is something, a network that is implemented as a part of this guidance we're going to talk about in a moment with the demo, the RTEP network. This is a network that we create, the remote tunnel endpoint. We create this on all of the edge nodes in each location, and it gives us the ability to create gateways and segments that span multiple sites, right? And that RTEP handles the cross-location traffic. It's important when considering deploying NSXT Federation, right? We talk about SDDC Manager and VxRail Manager, and they do a great job of automating the deployment of the software-defined data center, right? So now we have NSXT in multiple regions. The NSXT Federation in the VMware Cloud Foundation documentation gives manual guidance for deploying the global manager, and we're going to go through that a bit with Corey in a moment. But it also gives you guidance on providing lifecycle management and things around certificates and password management, things that are automated by SDDC Manager. We give this additional guidance for the global manager since they're not a part of that automated deployment. And this is the location where you can go and look at that. In previous versions in VCF 4.2, this was all covered by the VMware Validated Design. As we move to VMware 4.3, VCF 4.3, It's now included in the Cloud Foundation documentation. Here's a link to that. You can go and read architecture, read up on the architecture and the design, but it also gives you detailed workflows to follow to manually deploy the global managers, do the onboarding, stretch your tier 0 gateways, and gives you everything you need to deploy this. Now, what we're going to do is in a moment, I'm going to transition to Corey, and he's going to go through a couple of steps that it takes to set up the NSXT Federation. He's also going to give you a tour and highlight the global networking objects. And lastly, he's going to demo a cross-region mobility job. So now I'm going to hand it over to Corey.
Thanks, Philip, for all that great information. So as Philip was saying, I'm going to talk about some of the NSXT Federation setup steps, right? So one of the things we wanted to show was onboarding a local manager to that global cluster that you mentioned. We've already done that for Region A, and we're going to show how to do that for Region B here. Basically, you can put in some very simple parameters about the local manager into the global manager UI and quickly onboard it. Once we click save, you'll see it go through the process of onboarding it, and you'll actually see that there are some local objects wanting to be imported now to the global context. The other setup step that we wanted to show that we thought was impactful was stretching the tier 0 gateway from Region A to Region B. You can see here that we've added Region B as a location, and it's running in primary mode in both regions. Another thing that you have to do is you've got edge nodes in both regions, and you need to add interfaces from each edge node in each region to the tier 0 so that it can pass traffic through those edge node clusters. Once you do that, there are some routing best practice settings that are defined in that VCF documentation in 4.3 that Philip mentioned that we set. Once we save those, you can actually see that we go in and add BGP neighbor information for Region B, information such as IP address of the neighbor or the autonomous system number and stuff like that. So that way we have BGP neighbors in both regions. Once we click save, you'll actually see that we're able to click on the edge nodes themselves right through this UI and see that the BGP peering is established. So you can actually see it's connected there on edge node 01 and 02 in Region B. And so there's a lot more setup steps than this in the documentation, but these are two of the most important ones that we wanted to highlight. So now we're going to go into the global manager tour. So it's important to remember that each region is really a VCF on VxRail instance, right? They share an SSO domain. And so you can log into the SDDC manager for Region A. You can go into the workload domain context, and you can see that there's a hot link to go right over to that local NSXT manager, and you can see we're able to log right in. And we're going to do that for Region B as well. But because the global manager isn't part of VCF automation right now, we still have to log into that global manager manually. Now you can actually see here in the local manager that it's aware that it's been onboarded. It actually shows the global manager clusters. So now we're going to go ahead and log into the global manager manually. You can see we're here in Region A global manager. The splash screen has some basic inventory information. If we click on inventory, you can see again some basic regions. There's a Region A, a Region B, and a global region defined, and that houses the different objects in their locality. If you click on system overview has sort of the high-level objects like the global manager clusters and specific regions and their RTEP status. If you click on the global manager appliances, you can actually get granular telemetry data about the global manager, like its IP address and its operational status for services and memory usage. Location manager also gives you more granular information about those objects, like the IP address and the VIP and the local NSXT manager that's actually joined to that region. And then if you notice at the top on this drop down right here, This is actually the context for the UI. So from the global manager, you can actually switch between the global context, which we're on right now, and the region A or region B local context, or on-prem as they call it. And so from one single pane of glass, we're able to manage all of the NSX objects in the system. Finally, if you click on compute managers, the global manager has to be attached to the vCenter for region A. So now we're going to talk a little bit about global networking objects. In the global manager, there's a networking tab in the upper left. Splash screen has some basic, inventory information like tier 0 gateways, tier 1 gateways, segments, VLAN backed overlays. If we click under tier 0 gateways, you can see that same tier 0 gateway that we set up earlier. You can see it's running in an active state. So it's processing traffic from both regions, and you can connect tier 1 gateways to it in both regions, and it's going to span that RTEP network. That's why it says primary. If we click down on BGP, again, you can see that BGP is enabled, ECMP is enabled for L3 load balancing, and you can see that we have neighbors defined and working in both regions. If we click on the tier 1 gateways, you can see that there's 2 tier 1 gateways, one for each region that was defined during VCF bring up, and then there's a third cross-region tier 1 gateway, and that cross-region has been configured per the manual guidance for Federation to connect to the tier 0 gateway that we set up. And you can see that it runs in an active standby mode where it's primary in region A and secondary in region B. And this pins traffic for that particular tier 1 to region A unless there's a failover. If we click on segments, you can see there's several VLAN back segments and a couple of overlay segments, and there's a cross-region overlay segment. And this is the one that's configured during Federation setup and connected to the tier 1 gateway. You can actually see it's there connected to that cross-region tier 1 gateway. And you can see that it exists in both locations. This is the one that your workloads are connected to. So now we're going to go ahead and do a workload mobility demo. This is what Phil mentioned earlier. So we've actually got a database server in region A and a database client in region B. And we're running Postgres on the database server. And we're actually going to start pgbench, which is a benchmarking tool for Postgres on the client. So on the right side, we're going to start a Postgres activity monitor on the server so we can see Postgres activity. And we're actually going to start the benchmark on the client on the left. Once we start it, you can see that activity starts right away. We're also going to bring up a real-time network traffic graph you can see down on the bottom right, which is actually showing that once we started that benchmark, traffic started running across that RTEP network. Now, this is a nested environment, and so we're not really trying to showcase performance here. We're going to go ahead and start the layer 3 vMotion. So we're actually going to move that VM from region A to region B. And we're going to pick region B as the destination cluster. And importantly, we're going to click the same cross-region network segment as the destination. So we're not changing networking. And this is that global networking that Phil talked about. Once we click finish, we're going to bring up those monitors again. And we're going to speed it up. And what you'll notice is, traffic ramps for vMotion, activity seems pretty stable. Once we get to about 287 seconds, you're actually going to see the transactions per second on the left drop to 1, and that's the actual cutover point right there. And now the VM has actually cut over from region A to region B, so the server and client are now on the same region. And you'll actually notice that the transactions per second have increased, so the performance has increased, and that's because the client and server are on the same region and they don't have to traverse that RTEP network. So that's basically the end of our demo. So to kind of recap, we covered some of those selected setup steps. We did a global manager UI tour, network objects tour, and we just showed you guys a workload mobility demo. And thank you so much for watching our vBrown Bag session. And if you want to find out more information, check out our website at engineeringtechnologist.com.